Okay.
So welcome everyone to my 5 at 5. I'm just kind of giggling here a little bit because we were giggling before I pressed record. This is where I ask people in the health, people that I know and love in the health and wellness area of life, 5 things that they do to keep their vibes high. And not necessarily just at this time, but in life in general. And today I am so happy to be talking to Jennifer Tan, or Jen, from Practice with Jen. And Jen is in Singapore. And I met Jen last year. Can't believe it was last year. When we did our Relax and Renew Level 2 with Judith Hanson Laster, the Restorative Yoga expert, and we clicked straight away. And I love what Jen does. Jen, she does private yoga, she does Hatha and contemporary movement. Big into the restorative yoga for athletes, and Jen is also an ambassador for Lululemon in Singapore. So thank you, Jen, so much for being here.
No, I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for taking the time out as well. And I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add there. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Brenda. So I'm originally from England, but I've lived in Singapore for over a decade. I've been out of England since I was 21, so traveling and living outside of England has become more commonplace. But I still miss home, especially right now. It has been quite hard the last few months to be away from family. But I think, much like we were saying just prior to this conversation, at the same time, the last few months have really given me opportunities to reconnect with a lot of people who I just didn't realize I was that close to until now. So
Wow.
so it's been a time of sort of rediscovery, I guess, and that's a privilege that I have to acknowledge.
Yeah.
But yeah, sort of I've been in Singapore for quite some time. You're absolutely right. Restorative is my jam. But yeah, I think sort of it's worth pointing out that I was in full-time education working with kids up until a few years ago, and then started to step more and more into yoga and movement and wellness spaces gradually, and eventually sort of like made the full transition. So teaching seems to be something that I cannot move away from.
Yeah.
But the world within which I teach has changed somewhat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen. So I suppose I'll hand it over to you if you want to let us know what your 5. I'm always fascinated asking everyone what their 5 things that they do to keep their vibes high, and then often the running theme that seems to come in with all of this as well. So I'll hand it over to yourself now, and you can. I'm just happy to sit here and listen.
Yeah, well, I loved it when you reached out to me and asked me about this because I love a good list. I'm very good at making lists. I'm not that good at crossing things off my list all the time. But I love making them. So 5 at 5 is right up my street. And I really sort of nerded out on that. So for each of my 5, I have a mini 5.
Oh my goodness. This is taking to a whole new level, Jen.
So it's sort of like, the fractals of 5 at 5, I guess. But yeah, I'll try and keep it brief. So my first thing to help keep my vibes high is to move with joy. And that has been a big lesson for me in the last probably 5 or 6 years. I've not always had a healthy relationship with movement. It was always very much driven by compensation for other things that I was doing, like eating, which isn't something you need to compensate for. But at the time, that was where my mind was. And I've really tried to shift into a space where when I wake up in the day, I ask my body, how does it feel and how would it like to move, rather than, oh, I did this yesterday, so I should do this today. Or, oh, Monday is gym day. Sort of I've really tried to move away from that space, not because I think it's bad, but it wasn't serving me. It wasn't serving my needs. So sort of for me, it's always just asking my body if I can be friends with it every day, and what would it like to do so that we can be friends. So my mini five within moving with joy is I typically fall into yoga or running. When I say run, I mean jog, run. um, really depends on who I'm talking to. A long walk by myself preferably, um, and a more traditional workout, so sort of whether it's weight based or body weight, and dance. And that's something that I've come back into connection with during the COVID-19 situation. So I don't know if you're familiar with the DJ Bob Sinclair, but he was doing a daily set every day
That's
for an hour.
exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a friend who pointed it out to me, and it was very early on in our lockdown here in Singapore when I started playing it, and I sort of closed the spare room door and just pranced about and felt so good. And also some days I would find myself crying and then carrying on dancing, but it was just this cathartic release.
Yeah.
And I used to dance as a child, and I just moved away from it, and so it's been really lovely to reconnect with that. um, so then my next one on my list is to be in nature, which is really important to me and can be a challenge here in Singapore, because Singapore is very tiny and Singapore is very much man-made. It's quite the metropolis, but because of its tropical climate, there are spaces that have been preserved or created that flourish really well because of the climate. um, and I thrive when I can step into those spaces. So my mini five within being in nature is that when I'm in nature, I want to see big leaves, like the bigger the better. I always look out for the biggest leaf that I can. Well, and because we're in the tropics, we're talking sort of, torso size, sort of, yeah. Works. Bright flowers, lush foliage, broad vistas. So we have a lot of treetop walks here in Singapore, or bridges that sort of span the city.
Wow.
And a body of water. I don't even mind if it's artificial, but I want to hear and see some sort of stream, brook, waterfall, something like that. That sort of makes the whole experience really rounded for me. Yeah. And just sort of a side note to that, I think it took me being out of England and out of the UK to realize just how wonderful the countryside is. Yeah, I didn't appreciate my holidays as a kid, when my parents would pack us off into a caravan. I didn't appreciate that at all, and I'd love to do that now. Okay, so moving on to number 3, and this is sort of how we found each other. So my third item is to find stillness. And I think what I find funny is when people attend my classes, feedback that I often receive is that they perceive me to be grounded. And I say perceive me to be grounded because I find that hilarious, because I have to work so hard to find that sense of peace and calm and groundedness that they then pick up on. And so I have a mini 5 for my finding stillness, and at the top has to be restorative yoga, how we met. Restorative yoga changed my life. It changed my perspective on my yoga practice. It changed my perspective on my body and how I could make peace with the body, and how there wasn't a crime in being soft, and being vulnerable. It taught me so many lessons and continues to teach me so many lessons. And then the others are nidra. I really love yoga nidra, and that's served me very, very, very well in the last couple of months. That's been quite the lifesaver at times. Third is mindfulness / meditation. I'm never quite sure whether to say I have a meditation practice. I don't know if that's something you can relate to. And I think even Judith has mentioned in her sharings how she sort of, watches herself try to meditate every morning.
Yeah.
Whether she is or she isn't is another question, but sort of slowing down. I really love walking meditations. I love something that sort of allows me to be fully present with one activity or one thing. So I've moved away from maybe just sitting meditation. I do that sometimes, but it's not always the case. I've just, I guess, broadened my field of what I consider to be a mindfulness practice, and that's really helped me. And then earthing, so getting my bare feet on the ground. I think this for me is more important here in Singapore than anywhere else I've lived. I live in an HDB, which is the Housing Development Board, so high-rise apartments. I'm on the 39th floor. Great views,
Wow.
but when you think about lockdown, it came to my realization. I was like, I can't remember the last time my feet were on the actual ground, not on the floor of my apartment, but on the actual ground. I remember sort of putting a mask on and going downstairs and just taking my shoes off and having to wriggle my toes in the grass. And I often wonder sort of, is that something that can be looked into in Singapore? And maybe Hong Kong, other similar places that have a lot of high-rise living and people just who have a disconnect with the ground. So earthing is really important to me. And I feel like maybe I was searching for a fifth one with this mini 5. But massage / self-touch. So either self-soothing, but I love massage. Like, I actually find for somebody who has so many body issues, I actually really enjoy trusting somebody else to just take my body and for them to work their magic. I find that there's something really wonderful about that, and I can be still in that, and I think that can be quite magical. Yeah.
Wow. Jen, did you have 5 in that last one?
I did. The massage was sort of squeezing in a fifth one there. Yeah, so I'm going to move on to my fourth. You must tell me if I need to sort of pick speed up.
No, please
but
don't, because I love sitting and listening, and I know the feedback I get from people as well, because I think as human beings we tend to be like a little bit nosy about what other people do as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm like, oh wow, this is great. And as you're talking, I keep trying to remind myself, don't interrupt, don't start talking. But I'm thinking, like, we could just do a whole conversation on stuff that you've talked, little elements of what you talked about there. So we may one day come back to that as well.
Yeah, I'd love that. Yeah, any excuse to see you again, Brenda. I'd love that. Yeah.
Love it.
So number 4, although this is not in any particular order, but my 4th item is to listen attentively. That helps to keep my vibes high. I used to be so very concerned with giving the right response that ironically I wouldn't hear what the person was saying fully. I was so worried about sort of like, when I respond, I want to make sure that I'm giving them the right response, that I wouldn't connect with what they were sharing with me. And that's taken me a while to really work on, and even to just admit that I was doing that, because I think I used to want to consider myself a good listener. And then to realize that maybe I wasn't, and to sit with that and figure out how I could become a better listener, was a bit of self-reflection and quite the bitter pill to swallow. But I'm glad that I did, because now I feel like, weirdly, even though I said there's no particular order, I feel like the more that I'm in touch with my body by moving with joy, and the more I'm in touch with nature, and the more I accept the importance of stillness, the better a listener I can be. So it was just as I wrote sort of down these ideas, sort of when I knew we were going to have this conversation, that I noticed they are connected, even though I hadn't really thought of them as such. And so I think that even listening attentively can apply in so many different ways. So I've got my mini 5. But the first one is meaningful conversations. I want to have conversations that nourish both people or everybody who's involved. I think that we should come out of conversation feeling fuller and revitalized, not drained and heavy and tired. And so I have had to maybe learn that the hard way by figuring out what it is to draw boundaries, what it is to let some people into your life, but with certain, sort of measures in place that keep it at a particular limit, and to let go of some relationships as well, But I think that the more I find the capacity to do that, the more meaningful the conversations become, because they're the ones that I'm preserving, right? They're the relationships that I'm really putting my energy into. So meaningful conversations is very much at the top of that. But that I also thought it translates into podcasts. I'm a big fan of podcasts. I never used to be. And I think it was because I couldn't listen. I would tune out, I would play something and then realize half an hour later I hadn't listened. So now sort of being selective about the podcasts I listen to, and consider them an educational tool almost. Some of them are just silly and for pure pleasure, but other times it's like, no, I want to listen intently, Music has always been a big part of my life, so that has to be in that mini list. Mantra, either myself or I have recordings of my teachers, and sometimes it's just really soothing for me to listen to them, especially my teacher in India, who I haven't seen for a long time. And then again, I feel this is a bit like a massage. This was like, oh, I need a fifth. But it's very much, it does ring true for me. I put soundscapes.
Oh.
So I really love that. I don't just mean like nature or city, but I think that places I've lived or places I visit frequently have very distinctive soundscapes. And the New York City Library, I think during lockdown, released a playlist of NYC soundscapes, which maybe to you and I wouldn't be that personal, but I think to New Yorkers would be an essential part of their life, right? Sort of, no matter how frustrated they might feel, sort of walking, walking across the sidewalk and heading to the subway. There were sounds that they would have been cut off from for a long time. And so I think that soundscapes make up a big part of our life, whether it's me taking the bus or getting on a train, or, if I get up early enough and I open the window in the living room, the soundscape there goes from almost static, like I can almost hear the lights, that are buzzing around, and then you start to hear bird song, and then you start to hear traffic, so you hear the layers of the city waking up. And I think that we all have it, right? Like we all have these soundscapes, but are we tuning into them, almost like the dial on a radio?
Yes.
Can we sort of tune into them and even appreciate those things? So yeah, that's my fifth element of listening. And then my fifth and final thing to keep my vibes high. So I don't want to sound like a bore, but I think you and I have had enough conversations on Instagram and just sort of seeing each other's work there, that this won't come as a surprise to you. But I think what's really important for us is to know that keeping our vibes high is not the same as good vibes only.
Yeah.
I think that to keep our vibrations high, we actually have to recognize that there's a lot of work to do. That might be work on ourselves. It might be work within what we share. It might be just acknowledging where we are in our own learning. And for me, all of that falls under the concept of svadhyaya. So I'm assuming that most people connecting through you are within the yoga community. But perhaps to clarify, I've got my final mini five for the fifth and final poise. My svadhyaya looks like observation within my yoga practice. So just being able to sit when I'm doing my pranayama, or to be aware in my asana practice of what I'm actually feeling, and to not go through the motions. I met my current teacher here in Singapore about 3 years ago now, and he's an Iyengar teacher. I had had a very negative experience with Iyengar yoga years previously, and I went into his class by accident because my other teacher had been called away or something, and he was covering. And I'm so glad that serendipitous occasion took place, because I haven't looked back, and I feel like he has taught me how you can respect the lineage without being dogmatic. He doesn't expect me to look like a textbook diagram, but he does expect me to be inquisitive about my own body and about how I'm experiencing the pose, and about what it feels like if I move my big toe this way or that way. Or where I do feel the energy and which direction I feel it pulling in or moving in. And all, we don't do anything fancy. The poses are what we might consider foundational, for want of a better word. But I've never felt more alive in, say, Uttanasana or, Tadasana, like just some of the poses that you wouldn't even blink at, or at least I wouldn't have a number of years ago, and just finding new life in that. So I think observation is a really big part of this. More recently, and this is very personal to me, but may resonate with some people, researching my family history to understand my own childhood better. I think that this is very brief, but my family history is very difficult and layered, like many people's are, but it's fairly undocumented on different sides. But I feel like that shouldn't stop me from looking at all. I feel like I do need to learn a little bit more, because with the current climate and everything that's happening at the moment, it has highlighted to me the work that I need to do on myself, so that I can stand in better solidarity with other members of the Black and Indigenous and other people of community, with those with those sort of groups, and including myself in that group, which I think I denied for a really long time as a child. So researching, and then as a follow-up to that, re-educating myself would be my third sort of mini one. Whether that is with the Black Lives Matter movement or the UK's history. I think it's been really easy for us to look over stateside, and I think it's just so much easier to see the flaws in a neighboring country, but to actually just come back onto your own doorstep and say, oh, wait a minute, we've actually got plenty to work on here. So to sort of work on that. And then my fourth one is continued education as a yoga teacher, more specifically. And I think that that's something that both you and I value, because that's how we met. And I try to make 1 or 2 investments a year in something that I feel is really valuable to my teaching. So last year was obviously restorative, and it was also functional range conditioning, because as you mentioned, I work with athletes on quite a regular basis. So I am open to other movement modalities and how they can complement other people's practices. And currently, I am, to some degree, working through the Yoga for All training with Diane Bondi and Amber Carnes. So looking at accessibility and inclusion within the physical yoga practice and beyond. So that's something that I'm very slowly working through. And then the fifth point is the decolonization of my personal practice. I think when I jumped on the yoga train, I didn't really give it much regard as to where it was from, of its origins, of how I might be benefiting from something that other people had been chastised for. And now, as somebody who teaches yoga and sure doesn't make a lot of money from it, but does make a profit from it, I feel like it's my responsibility to understand and undo some of the work that I may have done without the same level of concern as to who I need to honor before I take on that work. So yeah, that's also been something that's been quite important for me the last few years. And funnily enough, it started almost at the same time as I did my level 1 restorative, because I was in San Francisco to train with Judith for level 1, but a few days prior to that I met a teacher called Michelle Cassandra Johnson, and she wrote a book called Skill in Action, and that book shifted my entire perspective on how I teach, how I practice. Sort of for anybody here within your community who teaches or who's just a student and is curious, I would highly recommend her work and what she looks at. It's quite something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll find something. I'll put something up about that as well. Jen, I'm also
Yeah.
going to share some of your offerings too, because you're doing classes and stuff via Zoom online as well. So I usually tell everyone I'll put any links underneath in the comments when I
Great.
put this up on our page as well.
Thank you.
As it's one of those things that nature and music seem to be that running theme that comes through with all of this. At the beginning, a few people said routine, but I think that was probably even when everyone was trying to find their feet in this big change that's happening as well on all grounds. But yeah, it's like it's the music, it's nature, it's stillness, it's silence, it's all of those lovely yummy things that we like. And then it's so funny that you're talking about Bob Sinclair, because we had a whole Bob Sinclair thing going on over here as well.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
I was just here on my own in the spare room.
But wasn't it fabulous when you'd see people coming up? Like I'd be dancing away in the kitchen and I'd see Argentina and
Yeah.
in Alaska and from all over the world, and I was quite moved by that, because I was like, oh my God, we're all dancing together.
Yeah.
I mean,
There were definitely moments where I was sort of like, oh, you can dance and cry and laugh at the same time. I can do all of these things simultaneously. I was such a mess like the first few weeks of that sort of, but I'm also so glad that I found what he was doing. I think that was just such a wonderful offering. And I think that something like that also highlights that we all have something that we can offer in challenging times. I think sometimes we feel like, oh, well, I don't do anything of value. I'm not a key worker. I'm not sort of on the front line. I'm not saving lives. No, but maybe you're an artist and you can bring joy to somebody. Maybe you can bring 5 minutes of peace to somebody's day. I just think that everybody's got something that they can bring. And I think it's really interesting what you mentioned, how earlier on in this series, you found people, it's almost like their 5 was reflective of where they were along that timeline.
Yeah, most definitely. And then as our conversations now move a little bit, I find the conversations are moving, they're changing course a little bit as well, which is great, which is fantastic. I just wanted to mention as well, Jen, that you have up on your Instagram handle, in your link tree, the Justice for Elijah McLean. And for anyone who's not aware of this, Elijah, it was last August that he was murdered by members of the police in the States. But I suppose it is all relevant. It is all, for me anyway, because he was a massage therapist as well. And then just from what you were talking there about the massage, I just thought maybe to throw that in too. That what you've put up is amazing, and it's actually inspiring me now. I'm going to do the same. That we do have a responsibility. We do have a platform that I know as a white woman with oodles of privilege, like. But as we were saying at the beginning of the conversation, that if that we can use that in a positive way, if we can use that,
absolutely,
it's important.
I just think it's about a ripple effect, right? Positive ripple effects. If you have a conversation with 3 other people and one of them picks up on that idea and then goes and does their research and learns a little bit more about what they can do as an individual, and then they go and have a conversation with a few more people, I think that's what we need to focus on. I don't think we all need to be activists with 6 million followers and
Yeah.
swipe up
Yeah.
capacities, you know, with their social media platforms. Sometimes it is just about sharing something you read and you learn, and one person seeing it and going, oh, I'll look that up.
Yeah.
And you know, if we all did that, then I think the world might slowly start to shift. And I do feel, I don't know about you, Brenda, but I feel like there's a momentum in the movement that we see now that feels tangibly different. It doesn't feel like a trend. It doesn't feel like something that's on vogue and is going to disappear.
No.
I think it would have done so by now if that were the case. So I do feel like we're on the cusp of something
Yeah.
big, and that something big can be good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yes, this was great, and I just love the 5 lists in 5 lists. It's just
That's just my excuse to to list more things.
all I'm thinking is like, oh goodness, I hope nobody else feels the pressure now the next time they come.
No, no, that is really just how much I love a list. That's all.
I love it. I think that's so brilliant. Camilla, thanks so much again. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And for taking the time out. And what people didn't realize as well was that I got the time difference completely mixed up earlier today.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, completely mixed up. So it's like 8 o'clock. Well, it was 8 o'clock when we came on, but it was supposed to be 7 o'clock. And sure, I was out of the bed, and Jen's in her afternoon going, where's Brenda? So yeah, but then Jen told me about an amazing app that's going to sort my life out with regard to time differences. So
It's
thanks
going to
so
be good for your other conversations. Yeah.
much. Jen, thank you so much. And as I said, everyone, I'm going to put any links and stuff like that for Jen. I'm going to put them in the comments. You'll get her on Instagram as well, Practice with Jen, Jennifer Tan. And yeah, so thanks so much, Jen. And yeah, hopefully
Thank
we'll see you
you.
soon, either Singapore or in London, or you never know, wherever.
Yeah, I'd love to pop over to Ireland once I can
Yes,
get over, once I can get that far across
I know, definitely. Well,
land and water.
yeah, if you get to Liverpool, you won't have that far. You won't have that far.
That's true. That's true.
Thanks so much, Jen. Talk
Thank
to you soon.
you. See
Bye.
you. Bye.